Today we're presenting a program, 1938Projekt, Developing Holocaust Curriculum in a Challenging Environment. The Leo Baeck Institute had a look back at the year 1938. And we created a number of educational modules related to that for use in classrooms. We also wanted to put that within the framework of larger issues surrounding Holocaust education in the United States today, which has certainly been much discussed in the news in the past 2 years in particular. And I wanted quickly to introduce the people who will be speaking. I'll just do it very quickly. It will be in order of their speaking. Christina Chavarria is program coordinator in the Levine Institute for Holocaust Education at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. Actually, I don't have these quite in order here. Rebecca Krukoff is a former social studies teacher and music educator. She is currently on the faculty at Pratt Institute, where she teaches courses in education, museum education, and public history. Renata Evers is the Leobeck Institute's Director of Collections. Then we have Jody Medell, educator at the Lyons Community School in Brooklyn, New York. And Delaney Cisnero, educator at MS-223, the Academy of Finance and Technology in the Bronx, New York. So we can begin, and actually Renata will be speaking before Rebecca, but that's a side point. It will all become very clear in the actual, I'm not worried. So we'll begin, and first I want to say a few things about the Leo Baeck Institute. The Leo Baeck Institute was founded in 1955, and it was created to be a repository for German-speaking Jewish history. We have a large library and archives, both of which you're going to hear about in this discussion. And the 1938Projekt is one of many programs we've had as a form of outreach and a form of education about German-speaking Jewish history. So I'm going to begin now by sharing my screen. Hold on here. So, okay. I also wanted to say that we can, if you have any questions during the event, you are welcome to put them in the question and answer in the below at the very bottom of the screen. And after the talk, we'll try and answer all the questions that we can get. That we have time for. So we'll begin here with the 1938Projekt, Developing Holocaust Curriculum in a Challenging Environment. And hold on here. Okay, I already see there's going to be something goofy going on. Hold on. Wonder if it's Sophie, maybe we should use yours.
Okay, just give me 1 second to
yeah, I've been having trouble with this recently. That's one reason I wrote you earlier. Sorry everyone, just hold on a second. There. Thank you, Sophie. I'm sorry.
Can everyone see okay?
I can see it fine. I'm
okay,
sorry.
Perfect.
Yeah. So you can start at the next slide, and then we'll begin with Christina Chavarria speaking. Christina?
Hi, Michael, and hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. And I'm Christina from the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum, coming to you from Washington, D.C. where I live and work. And I just want to say a big thank you to Michael for inviting me to be a part of today's program. We've known each other for a few years now, but this is the first time that we are working together for teacher professional development. And the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum, as you know, is in Washington, D.C. You can see from the picture, you see the Washington Monument in the background. I just want to say a few words about the museum. Currently, we are closed due to the COVID crisis, but we have an incredibly robust program online. We offer many programs right now. Due to the pandemic, we have moved everything into a virtual world, and we have many things that are recorded. So I invite you to follow us on social media. And I also invite you to go to our website where we have a wealth, and that's an understatement, where we have a wealth of resources, and some of which I want to share with you today. But I do want to say just a couple of things about the museum. We are located on the National Mall, as you can see. And the reason why we are on the National Mall is because we were established by a charter of Congress in 1977. We are a part federal institution, and under President Jimmy Carter, this charter was created to develop a national and official American memorial and museum and repository of the record of the Holocaust in the United States. So we're a museum, but we're also a memorial, and we do have a vast collection of documentation of the Holocaust, which some of it I'm going to share with you today in relation to the 1938 project. One of the other reasons why we exist on the National Mall is because we want to be a reminder to the country that as you come to Washington, D.C. and you walk among all of the monuments to American democracy, the Washington Monument, the Jefferson Memorial, the Lincoln Memorial, we do want to serve as a reminder that democracy is fragile. And we've seen instances of this lately, and we do make light of that in our programming. So we want to be a reminder to everyone that this history, the history of the Holocaust, shows us that we have to be ever vigilant about democratic principles, and we have to be very aware of when we start to see democratic principles being slipped away. So that is a major reason why we exist also. And we want to also get at the bigger question of how and why the Holocaust happened. And this is why I'm really happy that Michael invited me to be a part of the program today, is because I think the 1938 Project does help us to answer the questions of how the Holocaust happened. We'll never fully know why. There isn't one document that speaks to that. But looking at the events of 1938 gives us a clearer picture of some of those turning points in the history of the Holocaust as to how things went in a certain direction, especially after 1938 and leading into 1939 with the war. So if we could go to the next slide, and if you can just click one time. At the museum, we do not have a full curriculum on teaching about the Holocaust. We have developed many lessons, and we continue to add more and more lessons that you can use in your classroom that take you from point A all the way to the very end in particular topics. Since we are the national memorial to the Holocaust, and there is no national curriculum per se, every state decides what the standards will be and what will be taught. What we have are guidelines for teaching about the Holocaust. Now, hopefully you'll be getting a handout with some links that I shared, a Word document where you can find the guidelines for teaching about the Holocaust on our website. And you can just Google guidelines for teaching about the Holocaust and these will come up. We have 10 guidelines that are not really just related to teaching about the Holocaust, but they're related to good teaching, period. And they help us to really look at history in an accurate and sensitive manner. We know that teaching about the Holocaust can be very complex, it can be very difficult. There are many times where we see it in the news where it is referred to often, and that's happened a lot in the last 2.5 weeks. But what we have here are these guidelines to help you think about what it is to teach and how to think about the Holocaust in a very critical thinking manner. The first thing that we recommend is that you define with your students what the Holocaust was. And in doing so, different Holocaust organizations may have different definitions of the Holocaust, and that's absolutely fine. Just make sure that your students understand what the definition is, whether you're using our definition at the USHMM or whether you're using perhaps the Museum of Jewish Heritage, which is right there close to many of you who are in the New York area there in Battery Park, which is a phenomenal museum, and we've worked with them very closely. They're good friends of ours. But what we look at the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum is the fact that the Holocaust could not have reached the horrible conclusion that it did and taken the lives of millions of victims, including 6 million Jews and 1.5 million Jewish children, if not for the role of collaboration. We look very closely at the role of collaboration. We also, when we define the Holocaust, we look at the Holocaust as being systematic and bureaucratic. It did not happen overnight. Certain systems were in place, certain structures were in place for this to happen the way that it did. And it was bureaucratic. It took a bureaucracy at many different levels and in many different places for this to happen. You needed, again, certain people in place, a certain amount of order in place for this to take place. And you also needed the law. We can look very much at the different laws that were enacted during the Holocaust, the different decrees, probably most notably the 1935 Nuremberg laws. And then when we're looking at 1938, we can also look at how those laws now impact Austria after the Anschluss takes place, the annexation of Austria as part of the Third Reich. Which happens overnight, whereas Germany, of course, that's a 5-year period. So it's very important to define the Holocaust, what it is for your students, and to look also at the different groups of Nazi persecution. We honor as victims of Nazi persecution gay men, we honor people with disabilities, Soviet POWs, Jehovah's Witnesses, the Roma and the Sinti. So we look at all of the different victim groups at the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum as part of the persecution by the Nazis and their collaborators as well. And we also make note of the fact that the Holocaust could not have reached the conclusion that it did without the Second World War. They are intertwined. We really strongly recommend that you look at the cause and effect of World War II on the Holocaust and how the Holocaust plays a role in World War II coming to be in September of 1939. So when we also teach about the Holocaust, we really underscore the necessity to contextualize the history. If you're going to use a book like Anne Frank's diary or Elie Wiesel's Night or Primo Levi's Survival in Auschwitz, your students need to know how Anne Frank came to be in hiding, how she was born in Germany, but she ends up living in Amsterdam. Contextualize the history, what happens in all the years leading up to when she begins to write her diary and when she goes into hiding in 1942. It's very important to do that. And you'll see that today with the 1938 project. Understanding when you look at it, that now you have an expanded Third Reich with the annexation of Austria and parts of Czechoslovakia, the Sudetenland. So very important to understand when we're looking at a particular document, and today you're going to see a wealth of documentation, what is the bigger history around that? And at the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum, we provide many of those tools to help you contextualize the history. Also, we related to that, within the context of teaching about the Holocaust, it was not inevitable. This did not happen in a vacuum. It did not happen overnight, and it was not meant to happen. We look at the role of choice, we look at the role of pressures and motivations and different factors, and we also look at the roots of the Holocaust going beyond, or actually predating 1933. What happened in other time periods in history where you start to see how anti-Semitism, for example, changes over time, and how it becomes more of a racial ideology in the late 19th century that will play a significant role in Nazi Germany. So it's very important to understand that the Holocaust was not inevitable. And there were different points, particularly in the year 1938, where this history could have gone a different way. But certain choices were made, certain things happened that influenced choices. And the last guideline, and we have 10, but I'm sharing 4 with you today. The last guideline is to avoid simple answers to complex questions. When your students ask questions, for example, why are the Jews the main target of Nazi persecution? It's really necessary to unpack that, not only within the Holocaust, but again, as I mentioned before, the history of anti-Semitism. One of the big questions that we get at the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum is the question, why didn't they just leave? If they were being persecuted, why did they not go someplace else? Why did they not move? And today you're going to see lessons that deal with that question and help to address that question. It's very important if you're looking at the United States, for those of you who are U.S. history teachers. What were immigration laws like here in the United States, starting in the 1920s? Look at the quota system. It's very important to unpack these complex questions that your students come up with, because that really does foster their critical thinking. It gives you the opportunity to use some of those incredible primary sources that you're going to see today, and also to use some of the resources that I'm going to share with you right now from the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum that will help to expand on understanding the historical context. So if we can go to the next slide. One of the things that that we're sharing with you is using our Holocaust Encyclopedia. We have a vast online encyclopedia of articles, close to about 1,000 articles, and we continue to add many more articles on topics related to the Holocaust. So for example, this is a photo from part of our Holocaust Encyclopedia article on Kristallnacht. And within the Holocaust Encyclopedia articles, we have photos for you to look at. We also hyperlink to other related topics within the articles. We also ask essential questions at the bottom of each article for you to use with your students. If you're assigning them, for example, an article to read, these questions are very helpful. So when you receive the Word document with the links, you will get the link to this particular article, but you can see that we have many other articles as well. Like I said, we have probably close to 1,000 now, and we keep adding. And I also want to add that for those of you who teach students who speak other languages, our second language that we have the most materials in is Spanish. We have a huge amount of articles that we've translated from English to Spanish. We're doing much more translation in Spanish now, so you can find on our website many more resources, and not only in Spanish, but we have 12 other languages as well where we have translated much of our material, primarily starting with the Holocaust Encyclopedia. So if we go to the next slide, we also have many online exhibitions. Now, if you've come to the museum, the physical museum here in Washington, every few years we offer a large contemporary exhibit. And right now we have an exhibit called Americans in the Holocaust. We have this broad initiative where we're looking really deeply at how Americans responded to the growing Nazi threat in Europe. But in previous years, we did have an exhibit on Kristallnacht, and Kristallnacht does feature largely on our 4th floor in our permanent exhibition. So I'm just going to ask Sophie or Michael if you can click on the link just to show you some of the resources. This is one particular resource that we have on Kristallnacht. I'm not sure if, yeah.
One moment while we switch screens.
Sure. So if you look right here, this is the beginning of our online exhibit on Kristallnacht. And we do have quite a bit more, but if you scroll down, you'll see where we give you the historical background, we give the context. We also link you to historical photos, and we also link you to survivor testimony. So we also show you other articles related to Kristallnacht to give you a more robust background to teach about Kristallnacht, because Kristallnacht was considered to be the turning point, especially in 1938. And after Kristallnacht, this is where we see a very significant increase in visa applications, primarily among Jews living in the Third Reich, who now realize that they need to escape now, they need to get out. If they hadn't done so or tried to before, this was really that huge signal. So if we can go back to the PowerPoint and go to the next slide. One of our more popular features that we have, that we host every other week, is now our Facebook Live series. You don't have to have a Facebook account, and we do record them. If you can't join us at 9:30, they're usually at 9:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time on Wednesdays. But we do record them, and again, you don't need to have a Facebook account to watch them. But this particular Facebook Live, we offered it in November in honor of the anniversary, the 83rd anniversary of Kristallnacht. And this is a picture of Susan Warsinger. She's one of our survivor volunteers at the museum. She's now 91 years old. She looks like she's about 70. She's a beautiful, lovely person. And it's an interview with her about her family's experiences during Kristallnacht. And I don't think we're going to have time to watch any of it, but you're going to get the link in that handout. And you can just, again, join us on social media on Facebook, and you'll be able to see where we have the different Facebook Lives recorded for you to use. They're about 30 minutes each, so they're very user-friendly in the classroom. So if we can go to the next slide, please. So the other resource that I want to talk about, or the other historical theme, is the theme of the Dominican Republic. And this is very key because, again, looking at that year 1938 and some of those critical events of 1938, the Evian Conference was held in July of 1938. And again, when your students are asking that question, well, why didn't they just leave? The Evian Conference is one of those episodes in this history that we encourage you to unpack with your students. 32 nations sent representatives to the conference in Evian, France, that was convened by the United States under President Roosevelt, but he himself did not attend, nor did anyone from his cabinet attend. Two gentlemen attended, James MacDonald, who went on to become the first ambassador to the State of Israel, and Myron Taylor. And out of the Evian Conference, the Evian Conference was basically seen as a failure, because only one country came forward and said that it would increase its quota. All the other countries gave very different reasons for why they would not take in more refugees, and they might have already taken in, they would not go beyond their immigration quota. And for the United States, we didn't have a refugee policy at the time. So even though we were calling on this conference, we ourselves did not agree to take in additional refugees. So I do want to say with regard to Kristallnacht, which happens 4 months after the Evian conference, President Roosevelt did extend the visas of anybody from living in the Third Reich who happened to be in the United States. Their visas were extended for 6 months. They did not have to go back, and that did allow some of them time to be able to secure asylum, if not here in the United States, in other places as well. But only the Dominican Republic came forward during the Evian conference and said that it would, it would increase its quotas to allow up to 100,000 Jewish refugees to go to the Dominican Republic. In the end, less than 5,000 visas were given to them. But Rafael Trujillo, who was the dictator at the time, who sent his son to the Evian conference, donated land. And this is not to put Trujillo in any kind of benevolent light, because we know that he himself was a murderous dictator too. But factually speaking, he did donate land that he owned. And it was an opportunity to bring refugees who largely did not have agricultural experience to the country. Most of the refugees, most of the Jewish refugees who were leaving, who had the opportunity to leave the Third Reich, most of them were white-collar workers. They were in white-collar jobs. They did not have agricultural experience. But what I want to show you here just for a couple of minutes is a film that we have. It's really a propaganda film. It does leave out a lot of details. But this is something that puts Sosua in a very particular benevolent light. So Sophie, if we could just show a couple of minutes of this, that would be great.
Yes, just give me just a moment to get it set up.
Sure, thank you. We also have articles, Holocaust Encyclopedia articles on the Evian conference, which then takes you to more information on the Dominican Republic itself. And in the end, less than 800 people were able to go to Sosua, but it did save their lives. And that's a very notable history. And you'll see more of that with the 1938 project.
Can everyone hear it?
Let's see. Yeah, it should have volume.
The Dominican Republic, about the size of Holland and Belgium, with a population of about 1.5 million, has opened its heart to the homeless people of a troubled Europe. Number one settlement is at Sosua Bay on the estate of 26,000 acres contributed by Generalissimo Trujillo. The plan was promulgated before the Intergovernmental Committee of 32 nations at the Evian Conference called by President Roosevelt in 1938. Forward-looking Generalissimo Trujillo, then President of the Dominican Republic, recognized the opportunity presented to his sparsely settled country in giving welcome entry to European exiles. Land was broken and construction begun at Sosua on the fertile, breeze-swept acres in the spring after the signing of an agreement between the Dominican government and the Dominican Republic Settlement Association. Sealed on the 30th of January 1940, the pact was unique in history, a covenant between a government and a private humanitarian corporation providing for settlement of 100,000 refugees. 500 families were to comprise the first contingent to be admitted. The United States offered fullest cooperation. U.S. transit visas made it possible for the ships bearing the carefully selected settlers to pass through American waters en route to the tropic isle in the blue Caribbean. Beautiful, modern Trujillo City is capital of the Dominican Republic. Here, representatives from 32 nations met to witness the signing of the contract and again a year later to celebrate its first anniversary. From General...
Yeah, thank you. You can watch it. Again, you'll receive the link on the handout. This is on our website. I do want to just note a couple of things about what we saw. It makes reference to the Evian conference, but it doesn't mention that the Dominican Republic was the only country that took in refugees. It also doesn't mention that the refugees are largely Jewish and that they are, and what they are escaping. And it gives this very kind of glossy view of what life will be like when we know that Sosua actually almost failed. There was one point when it almost closed because it was very difficult to cultivate the land at first. And again, many of the refugees, they did not have agricultural experience. So on that note, if we can go to the next slide, I'd like to encourage you to use our photo archives. Now we have about 100,000 historical photos in our archive, and we've scanned and digitized and made available on our website at least 30,000, if not more. And what we provided here are two pictures from two collections that we have. And the picture on the left is one of my absolute favorite archives that I work with. And this is a man named Franz Blumenstein. He owned a perfume shop in Vienna, and his story encompasses a lot of the history of 1938 and 1939. His family is, of course, caught up in the Anschluss, being Viennese Jews. He is arrested after Kristallnacht and he is sent to Dachau. He's only released from Dachau because his wife Elsa is only able to put together enough money to bribe the officials to let him go. But she also has to show proof that he will leave Austria, that he will leave the Third Reich. But again, where can you go? He goes on a boat called the Königstein to Trinidad and Tobago. They're refused entry and he goes to Venezuela. Venezuela takes in the passengers on the Königstein, very similar to the St. Louis, if you're familiar with that story. But then he goes to Cuba because his sister is accepted into Cuba, and he's able to secure passes for his wife and son who were in Vienna to come on the St. Louis. They're not able, as we know the story, they're not able to even disembark from the boat when they reach the coast of Havana. The wife and son go back to Europe. They go to Amsterdam. They go into hiding. And he's able to then go to Sosua. He had no agricultural background, but here we see him milking cows. And he's able to get visas for them to go to the Dominican Republic. But tragically, the war expands into the Netherlands. They're overtaken by Germany. His wife is found. She is sent to Auschwitz where she does not survive, but his little boy survives in hiding. He's taken in by a Christian family. And the little boy, whose name is Heinz, he and his father are reunited in the United States in 1946. And Heinz, who now goes by the name Henry, who lives just north of me in Silver Spring, donated this collection. It's a phenomenal collection. We provided the link where you can see all of the letters. You can see correspondence from the State Department. You can see correspondence from the Dominican Republic, where he's trying to get his family to join him. And you see all of these photos of the family from their life in Vienna through Sosua and the Dominican Republic and beyond. The other photo on the right is a more recent collection of photos that we've acquired from a child survivor of the Holocaust, Marcel Solomon. He was able to go to Sosua too, and this is a picture of him playing with bubbles in Sosua. He was actually bar mitzvahed too in Sosua, in the small synagogue that they built there, and we have photos of that in the collection too. So what we encourage you to do is to look at these stories, which the 1938 Project does beautifully, but these are also some supplements that you can use along with the 1938 Project from our collection. And when you go to the links, and you can have, well, I don't know if you can have the PowerPoint, but I did provide the links in the handout that you're going to receive. You will see that we also provide, for every photo that we have, we also provide the historical context behind each photo. So thank you so much. And if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A tab. And next, you will be hearing from Renata Evers. So thank you, everybody, and please stay in touch, and good luck to you.
I also wanted to add that since we're a little behind time, we'll go on a little late, a little after the time we have planned, to be sure to take some questions and answers. Thanks, Christina.
Okay, 1 second. Okay, I think I'm set up. Thank you so much for this wonderful presentation, and also welcome to everybody. And thank you so much for joining the program 1938 Project, Developing Holocaust Curriculum in a Challenging Environment. So my name is Renata Evers. I'm the Director of Collections at the Leo Baeck Institute, and I will briefly present background information related to our institute, introduce LBI's 1938 calendar project, which was the basis of this lesson plan project, which is the focus of this event. On my first slide, you can see an image of our building in New York, close to Union Square, where we would have been. The building houses 5 Jewish research organizations under the umbrella of the Center for Jewish History, and we offer access to 500,000 books and 5 miles of archival documents. We are open to the public and the research community by a reading room, and increasingly in digital form. The building also houses exhibitions and is a location of a vibrant event scene, currently in virtual form. So the Leo Baeck Institute was founded in 1955 by German Jewish intellectuals and scholars in 3 locations, and it's dedicated to the study of German Jewish history and culture. So it's not primarily a Holocaust Institute. And it's named after Rabbi Leo Baeck, an important leader of German Jews during the Third Reich. In 2001, LBI New York opened a branch of its archives at the Jewish Museum Berlin, hence the name New York Berlin. A very brief overview of our collections. So our archive features 2,000 archival collections, the papers, documents, and letters of German Jewish individuals and families from the German Jewish immigrant community in the US. Their collections are mainly rooted in the Holocaust and the immigrant experience, but very often papers go back several generations. Many collections also document life after World War II. Most of our collections are fully digitized and can be found through a simple search box on our website, and I'll show that to you later. The library collection has more than 80,000 volumes, 1,600 periodicals related to German Jewish history and authors, one of the most comprehensive collections worldwide. Featured here are some titles of the rare book collection. There's also an art and object collections, and large parts are already digitized. In 2018, LBI launched the 1938 project to commemorate the 18th anniversary of the fateful year 1938, to curate digital material and use it as a teaching tool to reach new audiences, to apply optimistically the lessons from the past to today's challenges. The 1938 project, it was spearheaded by LBI's project director, Magda Wobel, with the entire institute involved one way or the other. And the 1938 project presents significant individual documents or photos from 1938 in a daily calendar. The document of the day or the photo of the day is accompanied by a short text and a quote. A link leads to the large archival collection or publication, and everything is embedded in the timeline of major events. I will briefly show you the live version after my overview. However, I also want to show you a visualization of key historical events, which were assembled by my colleague Magda. Overall, the year 1938 marked a turning point, as Christina said. What happened in this year showed German and later also Austrian Jews that there was no future for them in the German Reich. Some of the, that was already mentioned, in March 1938, the Anschluss of Austria. these images show persecution, humiliation of Jews following the Anschluss, the failed Evian conference in July 1938 that Christina mentioned, and examples of legislation to segregate the Jewish population even more. The adoption of additional first names, Israel or Sarah, and the notorious stamping of passports with the red letter J. The Munich Agreement, that's the secession of Sudetenland in Czechoslovakia in September 38. Then, of course, Kristallnacht. Over 1,400 synagogues were damaged, more than 267 destroyed, about 7,000 Jewish businesses were looted and destroyed. At least 91 Jews were killed and 30,000 Jewish men were sent to concentration camps. And that was clearly the turning point. In December 1938, the Kindertransport started. Over 10,000 children were rescued through British efforts. There were several smaller Kindertransporte to the Netherlands, Belgium, France, Sweden, and the US. On the background of these historical events, LBI's 1938 calendar project tells the story from the perspective of the victims in 365 letters, photos, and documents. And then in 2020, almost to the day, 1 year ago, so 8 New York educators, of whom you see 2, used our curated 1938 calendar project to develop 11 lesson plans under the guidance of educational consultants Rebecca Khrushchev and Natalie Milbrot, who is also in the audience, as well as my colleague Marc Dagny. We had 2 workshops in January 27, and this lesson plan project was sponsored by the Metro New York Library Council as part of their pilot project, User Engagement with Digital Collections, coordinated by Anne Karl-Zenit, Associate Director of Business Development at Metro. A heartfelt thank you for the initiative to connect special collections to the educational world. Just one remark from a collections manager perspective. Through the lesson plan project, the Leo Baeck Institute learned how educators search, find, evaluate, and use original source material to teach K-12 students, a group that is not a traditional user group of the holdings of the Leo Baeck Institute. This will have a direct influence on how the Institute will index and catalog new collections to make them better discoverable. Teachers and students need to be able to find interesting, specific individual documents or objects more easily, which are able to tell a story on their own, in addition to their embeddedness in their usually larger context, family story, and in their historical context. Let me now show you, 1 second, let me now show you the calendar project itself. Moment, if I find it. Moment. Should be here. Okay. Okay. This is our main website. I had mentioned before there's a search box. You can find all the collections that I mentioned through the search box, either the descriptions or the digital versions. Moment, this doesn't go away. So then, okay. This is a documentation of the entire project. And now I would like to show you the calendar itself. This is a website that features the lesson plans that were created based on the 1938 project. And here's the project itself. Okay. So it's www.lbi.org 1938 project with the letter K. There's an English and a German version. So then each day has an entry, and usually the document or photo of the day corresponds to the date. And so there are 365 entries. So you can either click on that image or the document to see it enlarged or in more detail. You can go back to the source and see how it is embedded. Then it is possible also to search. and there's an advanced search option. For example, you could look for photos or a diary or an affidavit if you look for specific documents. You can pinpoint a historic event and see options. We also have a filter option by topics. Or you can just limit the search by language. No? So then you would find all the English documents. Then we also have a whole section dedicated to educational sources, pedagogical resources, where you can find the lesson plans that were developed as part of this 1938 lesson plan project together with the Metro New York Library Council. And here are all the lesson plans. But we also have additional resources, and there's also a template. So we are also interested in if other educators use this material and, for example, write a lesson plan. We would be absolutely delighted if you could share it with us, and then we can put it up here for usage. So, and with that, I would like to turn over to Rebecca. So if you can take it from here.
Thank you, Renata. Great, that's exactly where I wanted to be. So it was really great to hear Renata just talk about this project, because she mentioned Natalie Milbrodt, who is in the audience. Together, Natalie and I do work with museums and archives with the goal of supporting them and amplifying their collections for new audiences. And we were able to do this with the funding by the Metropolitan New York Library Council, as Renata mentioned. And Natalie and I ended up working with Magda and Renata very intensely for a number of months, and it was really wonderful. It was clear to us that both Magda and Renata were very aware about how their collection could be used to support teachers and students, or they had this idea that they wanted to do that. They knew that they had an incredible collection, and the way that the 1938 project was organized, there were all of these opportunities they knew if they just knew how to do it. And working with teachers and students was not something that they had done before. So when the four of us began to work, we started to brainstorm, well, what were their goals with the project? What did they want to do? And as you just saw, Renata showed you these incredible lesson plans that were created. But what we decided to do was to invite teachers into the collection. And you're seeing here an image of teachers from 5 different schools across New York City. And Michael, can you go to the next slide, please? And we created and hosted 2 full days of workshop for the teachers. And so you can see here, Renata and Magda also is there, and the teachers actually were collaborating together. So Magda and Renata, of course, have expertise in their collection, and the teachers have expertise in teaching and working with students. And so we spent a couple of days together learning each other's expertise, learning the collection. And Michael, if you go to the next slide, please. The teachers did hands-on work with the collection. So they dug deep into the 1938 Project website, but additionally, they got to go into the archives with Renata and see the physical artifacts that inspired the website. And when Jody Maydell speaks later, she'll talk a little bit about the impact of that on her lesson plan. And so together, the teachers brainstormed. They got to work one-on-one with Renata and Magda over a series of 2 days, and they came up with a variety of lesson plans. Michael, if you go to the next slide, please, that are on a variety of different themes. And some of these themes, of course, are directly connected to 1938 and the Holocaust, but they also connect them to issues that students are grappling with today, or different places or in different time periods in history. And so when we're talking about making connections and teaching the Holocaust today, these lesson plans do that across different time periods and topics. So the end results of this project there were many results. One, obviously, is that there are these incredible lesson plans now that were created by these teachers that are digitally accessible, not just to New York City teachers, but to educators across the country and beyond. But what Renata was just saying is also equally important and poignant for the work that we were able to do with Leo Baeck, which is that the teachers themselves were introduced to this collection, one that they might not have been aware of before, and its incredible resources. And they were able to work directly with an archivist and a curator, who are people who have expertise outside of their field. And they were able to dig deep into archives in a way that was unique with these two professionals. And in turn, Renata and Magda had never worked with teachers before. And this opportunity to work with this incredible group of teachers built their capacity as well, so that they now have the tools. If they want to continue to work with educators in the future, they have a template for doing instructional workshops with teachers. They understand what a lesson plan is. And Renata was just mentioning that she learned a lot from the teachers about what schools need, and that's informing her practice. And that was equally important for Natalie and I when we were working with everyone. So without much more, I really want to get to the teachers themselves. There's two really wonderful teachers here today, and I'm going to immediately pass it over to Delaney Cisnero.
Hi, everyone. So my name is Delaney Cisnero, and I worked with the Leo Baeck Institute almost exactly a year ago, we were just discussing. So when we went into this project, we did not know exactly what we were expecting. We knew that it was trying to get a different outlook into historical research and archives, and specifically how to get the 6th through 12 audience, 6th grade to 12th grade audience, into looking at primary sources and archival work, which I was excited about. So our first day, we were just getting lots of background information on the 1938 project, learning the website, which was super cool, especially the way that it's made as a calendar. And like Rebecca was saying, we were able to see some of the archives and have that experience to be able to see what specific topic we wanted to work on. There was so much, and we were all very overwhelmed because there was so much material and things that we wanted to choose from and be able to introduce our students to one day. One of the things that I was particularly captivated by right away was the affidavits. So affidavits, as everyone probably knows, are so one of the processes for immigration that still exists today. And it is where the person who is trying to receive a visa to the United States has a US citizen write for them, almost like a letter of sponsorship, saying that they will be responsible for the immigrant when they come to the US. I was particularly captivated by that because it's something that I've heard of my whole life as an immigrant myself and coming from immigrant parents. One of the things that I was especially so interested in was how there were so many letters written almost to strangers a lot of the times, or people who these Jewish immigrants were just looking for it in a phone book and writing letters to see if anyone would grant them this sponsorship. And being able to read a lot of those primary sources was very powerful and impactful when we were doing that work that day. Here, there are two examples that I included in my lesson plan. The first one is, it says, I appeal to your human sentiment and feeling for blood relations if I take the liberty of asking you to help me to immigrate to the United States and procure the necessary affidavit for me. So we hear not only the tone of desperation, but also this like politeness and just trying for someone to do this favor for them. And I thought that was very powerful. The second one, even more, where we see someone asking for their brother to be able to be sponsored to leave to the United States, and saying that their brother is healthy and that they can read and write. And I thought that was very powerful. And I think students who read sources like these will automatically get the tone and the feeling that these people were having on that particular day when writing these. So one of the things that I was thinking was how all of these letters and requests show us the obstacles that there are for immigrants to be able to arrive to the US, and how these processes still are prohibiting certain groups of people from arriving to the US, and how those who are able to secure these affidavits hold a certain privilege. So my lesson plan was focused on specifically this teaching point. So letters requesting affidavits revealed the obstacles that the US immigration process placed on those without certain privileges, like education, connections to influential people, and money. We can go to the next slide. Thank you. So in my own experience, I heard this word a lot growing up because my parents, not only were they immigrants and so was I, but they also have done affidavits for people in the Dominican Republic to be able to come here. So as soon as I heard the word, I was interested to what it was and what role my parents played in that. And I was automatically thinking about, do these obstacles that these Jewish people were facing, do they still exist today? And how did my parents' experience, how does it play a part in that? And what I found out was that the US immigration process continues to exclude people from marginalized community, and the affidavits is just one of those ways that is done. Some of the big understandings that I had in my lesson plan for students to be able to think about and try to discover and investigate themselves through these primary sources was that the 1938 was a pivotal year in the acceleration of Nazi persecution of German and Austrian Jews, leading to the desperation of the Jewish community seeking affidavits. And then to help them think about how the US immigration process excluded and continues to exclude people from marginalized communities. I think this is a super important topic it's so interesting that almost 100 years later, it continues to have some of these same connections. And I think students, no matter the age, even my 11-year-old students, will be able to see those connections and themes, especially with the events that we've had in the last couple of weeks. Next slide, please. Thank you. I think this lesson plan will also help students not only with content and connections to today, but also learning specific skills and thinking about contextualization, thinking about what was going on in 1938 and what led to these particular people that they're going to read about in primary sources. Have to reach out to literal strangers and write their skills, write what they know how to do to be able to get in affidavits. One of the three basically factors that I was thinking students can be able to see from these primary sources were how certain privileges like education, connections, and connections to influential people and money were some of the factors that were able to lead people easily to get in affidavits. Whereas if you didn't have those three factors, then you were not able to immigrate. One of the things that me and my colleagues that day last year, one of the things that we all saw were the silences in this history, even in the 1938 project, and how people who did not have those privileges, we don't see sources from them, right? We don't see them, and even if we do see them writing letters, but we see that in their file, they were not able to follow up because unfortunately they couldn't immigrate. And those exclusions to the immigration process we see in their silences in history and in the primary sources, and something that's still happening today. So we're gonna, next slide, thank you. When I was just developing this lesson, I was thinking a lot about questions and what are some questions that I can ask my students as they investigate themselves to help them make these connections to the immigration process. One of the things I would be careful in when teaching this is, of course, knowing that they're not making connections with the situation between Jewish people in 1938 and Dominicans today. They're just seeing how the immigration process continues to exclude immigrants who don't have certain privileges. And then this will allow them to contextualize for Jewish immigrants in 1938 and contextualize for Dominican immigrants today. And I think making that distinction will be powerful and be clear for students. So thinking about who is considered a desirable immigrant, I think that's a very powerful question, and thinking about what are some qualities that immigrants have today, those immigrants that are here already, and how did that help them arrive? And like I was saying before, what are those silences there, and who are the immigrants who don't have the opportunity to arrive here? And thinking about how the immigration process has changed, but also remained the same. I have a small clip from the interview that I conducted. My lesson plan is broken up into 2 parts. The first part contextualizes 1938 and some of those reasons why Jewish immigrants were able to immigrate here and what were some of those ways that it excluded others from arriving. And then the second part connects to Dominican immigrants today and how the affidavit process continues to exclude immigrants who don't have those certain privileges. When I spoke to my parents about it, they were able to tell me that they've done affidavits for many people back home. We come from a small farming town in the Dominican Republic. And so my parents here, my mom was able to get an education and go to college. And that gave her a certain status and privilege to be able to grant affidavits for other people back home. And that's why I've heard the word so much growing up, because my parents were constantly going to lawyers and figuring out how to help other people with that process. I have 1 minute clip to play for everyone. The interview was like 8 minutes long, but I cut it down to just a minute. Here we go. Can everyone hear that?
My name is Milenia Aquino. I am from Dominican Republic.
How many years do you have in the US?
It's going to be 20 years.
So what was your experience with affidavits like?
The people who don't have a job or a good job need to borrow an affidavit from somebody else. If they don't make enough money, it's a limit, and then they need to ask somebody to help you with the affidavit. So me and my husband, we help a lot of people making the affidavit in order to come here to the United States.
So one of the things my mom was able to explain to me was that process that she had to go through multiple times, and how she had to give like her income tax and proof that she had like an apartment. And we know getting an apartment in New York City, it's hard. And like these are all certain steps that represents some sort of privilege here that not everyone from our town in the Dominican Republic has. And so they were able to give help in that way. And it also represents a way that people are still excluded from arriving here, even as to be a tourist and come just to see the US as vacation. You also need an affidavit. And so when you don't know anyone who's here and has a stable job and has an apartment, then you're denied. And so I think it would be really valuable for students to be able to make those connections and then think about why are certain people specifically left out, and thinking about who are those desirable immigrants, and why does that privilege there still remain today? Thank you. Next up, we have Jody Madell.
Thanks, Delaney. That was so amazing. My name's Jody Madell. I teach at Lyons Community School in Brooklyn. And the project, or the lessons that I'm going to show you today, are the result of obviously me participating in this workshop. This was really the first time, like Rebecca said, that I've had the opportunity to work with archives, even though I've been a history teacher for a long time. And as a history major in college, I'd never done anything like this before. It was a really amazing experience to get to read all these personal materials. And in particular, I wanted to say how great it was to work with Renata, who I'd never talked to an archivist before, and she really was able to guide me, translate stuff, explain how to get from one step to the next as I was doing this research. And that's what I tried to sort of create a similar experience for my students in this set of lessons. So what you're looking at here is the document that sort of first piqued my interest in, helped me to develop this lesson. It's a letter that you can see was written in November 20th, 1938. And so that's when it appears on the 1938 timeline. It says, "My dear aunt and uncle, I was very happy to hear that you will help us to come to America. I hope that your dear children are in the same age as I am, and I shall get good friends. Thank you very much. And I am, with kindest regards, yours sincerely, Gerda Feldstein." And similar to what Delaney was saying, I was really moved by the emotion, the excitement of this letter. And so that led me to dig a little further into Gerda's life. Renata took us into the archives, and we were actually able to, she took this letter out of a folder and we actually see the real thing, which was really amazing also. Can you go to the next slide? So this has been mentioned by a couple of other people, but I just really want to emphasize for teachers how great a resource this is. This is her letter, and below it, you can, just a clip from the letter, below it you can see there's a little information about the family, but the thing that I found so great about the archive was these links. So if you click on that link, there is a folder and there's all these amazing photographs of letters that were written between Gerda's parents, Fritz, Martha, and they had sent them to a family in California. And so you can't, it's not the same, it almost feels like actually leafing through a folder of letters yourself, because they're photographed front and back, and there's in this, and letters are photographed front and back. It's a very cool, almost tactile experience. Okay, you can go to the next slide. So one of the first things that jumped out at me when I opened up this link and went through the folder was this great picture of Gerda. This was taken on the back of it. It says that this was taken in 1937. So she was 10 at the time. And her father had written the location of where it was. It's in his handwriting, which I got to know a little bit through other materials. Okay, next slide. This letter, written October 16th, 1938, is the first, the earliest document from the family that I found in the collection. So I'm just going to read the beginning of it. It says, "Dear Mr. Feldstein, please don't be angry." I think a lot of what Delaney talked about, you can see here. "Please don't be angry if I am approaching you today in the following most urgent matter. Joseph Feldstein, a cousin of my father, Julius, has emigrated to the US in 1907, and my father has given him the necessary means for immigration at that time. We have heard nothing from the cousin as yet, and we don't know whether he is still alive or not. My father, Julius Feldstein, was born in Hungary and has died in the meantime. For reasons well known to you, I have left my position as a bank official in the leading bank of Vienna." He goes on to explain, "Owing to the conditions changed, it is quite impossible for us to remain there, and we therefore have to emigrate at the earliest possible moment. Having nobody abroad, I am soliciting your help without knowing whether you are one of our family or if it is an identity of name only. Nevertheless, I implore you as Jew to send me an affidavit for my family." One thing that I learned from looking at these letters and from talking to Renata is, in a way, it seems sort of obvious to say it, but of course people didn't know what was going to happen to them. And I think that the timeline does a really good job of making you sort of be like in it with the people who are experiencing, who are going through all this. Normally in history, it's like this happened 80 years ago, but I felt like as I was reading these letters, I couldn't help but be excited for these families when they get good news, and worried for them when they get bad news. And I think that that's something that archives can offer students that they don't really get necessarily from other types of learning about the Holocaust, for example. Okay, you could go to the next slide. they got a lot of very, very positive letters back and forth for, well, actually, I shouldn't say back and forth. I know they were receiving letters from the people in California, because all the letters that are in the collection of the Leo Baeck Institute were received by the people in California. And you can see that they're saying, the family in Europe is saying stuff like, thank you so much, we appreciate you. And they're just very polite, like Delaney said, and very, very grateful and excited about the opportunity that they're getting, that this family in California is going to sponsor them to move to America. But the letters also show, over the course of a couple of years, all sorts of delays, even though they have a family that wants to help them and they're building a relationship with them through these letters. And so things are not turning out in a positive way. And this is one of the later documents. Most of the letters are typed, but this one is handwritten, because the father, as you can see, he's left home. He's been forced to Poland, where he's supposed to, as it says right here, build up a Jewish state. And so in my lesson, the students are looking at letter after letter, and they can start to see that even though this family had tons of support, they weren't going to be able to implement their plan to move to California. Can you go to the next slide? So this I got very attached to this little girl, and it led me to think about how did just in general, the question of how did Jewish families attempt to protect their children from the Nazis. As Christina mentioned, 1.5 million children died in the Holocaust. Many other children were orphaned. But that's such an incomprehensible fact. And so the lesson is set up around 3 families and looking at what they went through to try to get their children out, so that students can understand just in a much more personal way what happened to people. You can take a look at the next slide, please. So one of the other children that I look at is this young man, Harry Connor Fiss. He has actually 4 entries on the 1938Projekt timeline because he's a really great writer, even as a young child. And he had a diary that his mother gave him to kind of keep track of what was going on. And you can see he writes in this very small handwriting in incredible detail. And I think the 1938Projekt, Magda must have decided to use so much of his writing in 4 different entries, because he's really a great job of describing what's going on around him. Next slide. And then the last family was these 2 children. I don't have a photo of the young Heinz Katcher, but this is his sister, Leanne. They appear, the brother appears on the timeline on December 27th. He was very homesick. He got sent to England on the kinder transport. And he must have written back to his parents to say how lonely he was, because they sent him so many cheerful letters signed by everyone in the family, encouraging him, saying how proud they were that he had been willing to leave home and go on his own to England. And then as time goes on, the letters get more. Oh, actually, could you go to the next slide? This is the first postcard that's in the folder for him, and you can see it's signed by tons of different family members. Like, everyone was sort of trying to encourage him, and Renata helped me by translating a lot of this. So with this family, as the situation worsened for them, they end up sending his younger sister, and the letters take on a much more serious tone as the parents are realizing that they're probably not going to survive, and that they're begging Heinz, even though he's a young person himself, to take good care of his sister, to be responsible for her, because they know that they're really not going to ever rejoin their children. Can you go to the next slide? So basically in the lesson, which I think would take at least five class periods, maybe a little bit longer. The students kind of mimic my exploration of the archive. So I have each group of students working with like this sort of curated set of documents for the family. I mean, there's many, many, many letters, and I kind of picked out what I thought were the sort of the most appealing ones or the most readable ones for students. They learn about one family in depth, letter by letter. That kind of builds suspense, and I felt a real emotional attachment to these children, and I think that students will as well. And so they explore the experience over the years, and then the students go to online databases to find out what actually happens to each family. Then they share in a jigsaw or in a full class discussion, looking for themes and connections and comparisons across the materials. That's it.
Thank you. Sorry, thank you. And that was a great discussion. And we can open it up now to questions. And but I thought it was very interesting. If we're ready to take some questions, you can write your questions in the question and answer box below. And I will start going through some of them. For the panelists, I know we're running a little late, so if it's okay with everyone, we'll go on maybe an extra 10 minutes or something. So the first question is, I think this would probably be largely for Renata and Christina. And it is, what are you doing to connect with teachers in Germany to learn about their curriculums and methodologies dealing with the Shoah? So maybe, Christina, maybe we'll start with you. I don't know if you have what connections or anything you're doing outside of the United States as far as internationally with Germany about teaching about the Holocaust.
Sure. Generally, we haven't done a lot because actually they have been almost more of the model for us. Germany has largely, in the last few decades, been pretty open and honest about its history, and they have their own efforts really to teach about the Holocaust. They are like we are members of the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. So we've worked with them in different ways, but recently we have worked with different German cities to bring an exhibit that we had in our temporary gallery called Some Were Neighbors. It's actually a poster set now that you can download, and I can give Michael the link and he can send to everybody who's in today's session, where you look at the pressures and motivations of ordinary people. So we have partnered with various German towns and cities to bring that to teachers, and we have a curriculum that we share with them. But Germany really largely has really taken the lead itself in Holocaust education. And has been a model for other countries where the Holocaust happened.
Renata, would you like to add anything?
Sure. So in a way, this 1938 project was the first time that our institute embarked on an educational project for younger students, because traditionally we are a special collection and more geared towards, let's say, history students, the academic world, and so on and so forth. And that was the first time that we were active in this area. So on the other hand, I mean, this calendar is available in German and English, so in 2 languages. And it has been used also in Germany, and we have reached out. Actually, there's an organization in Germany which is called, I have to say it in German, it's die Bundeszentrale für politische Bildung. I mean, it's a mouthful, but it's a central organization for political instruction. So that's one of the federal organizations. They are streamlining basically historical and political education, because otherwise it's more or less, I mean, an affair of the different states. But this is one area where there's a federal organization. And actually they took 5 of the stories and embedded it in their material. So in a way, there is some outreach on our side to Germany. So, but we are also very open if for example, educators in Germany take or use the 1938 project and write their own lesson plans, we would be absolutely delighted to, I mean, provide access to them through our website as well. But what I said, it's the first time that we did that.
Thank you.
Michael?
Sorry, I had a moment where I had put myself on mute. Thank you, Renata. Thank you. Yeah, so the next question is, are you using the work of journalists as primary source material? I'm assuming you said about the 1938 lesson plans. I know that in the 1938 calendar, yes, there are journalists who are mentioned and whose material is used. I don't know if anyone else can respond about that.
I can talk a little bit, just very briefly. So the lesson plans have a variety of different sources that were, they were starting with the 1938 Projekt site. And there are, I don't know so much, Renata can help me clarify, but there was one lesson in particular that focuses on, actually, I think there were not necessarily journalists, but US aid people coming from the United States who were going over to Germany and Austria to document what was happening for other American Jews. And so those records were actually the centerpiece of one of the lesson plans that's on the website.
Thank you. Thank you. Another question we have, this is actually more a comment. Very interesting to see people get involved in what went on in 1938 and how it applies today. Ms. Cisneros, your applications of what you learn to your own experience is rewarding. So that's just a nice comment. Thank you. This person goes on to ask, do we have data on how many people are receiving recompensation from Germany and the USA? I think that's probably a question for the archives itself. So I would encourage you to write the Leobeck directly with that question. And you can just send a basic email through our website and our reference department will receive it and we can work on that. We can answer that question for you. Thanks. Here's one for Delaney and Jody. Do your students come to these materials with prior understanding or impressions of the Holocaust or the phenomenon of anti-Semitism in general?
You want to go, Delaney?
Yeah, whoever would like to start.
I teach 6th and 7th graders, and so they usually have like big ideas of like things that happen in history, but nothing like anti-Semitism. These are usually terms that we have to break down and think about what they mean. But they usually have just like very general knowledge of things, and maybe 5 out of a whole class, not even everyone. So usually what we teach them is usually when they first hear about these huge events in history, unfortunately. So what we say and the way we teach things ends up being very important because these are usually the first times that they're hearing about these events.
Thank you.
I think, well, my students, I wouldn't say that they're aware of anti-Semitism exactly. They are, they often, my school is in Williamsburg. So there's a lot of Orthodox Jews and they don't necessarily have a great relationship with other people in the community of our school. And so it would be sort of an overstatement to say that kids are anti-Semitic, but they have a very they don't really understand Judaism or the range of different ways to practice Judaism, of course. And so that's part of what I was thinking with this lesson, was like, it's so human, that it's so intense to see what these families went through to protect their children, that I felt like it was something that kids could really relate to, no matter what preconceptions they have of Jewish people in their lives. So that's definitely was in my mind as I was thinking of how to focus it.
Thank you. Thank you. So the next question, I think, is probably also applicable to the two teachers with us today, as well as Ms. Krulkoff, probably. And that is, will recent events in Washington, D.C., as well as the murder of George Floyd, help teachers in addressing the warning signs leading up to the Holocaust? I don't know who would want to tackle that question exactly.
I have to read it over myself. Do you want to go, Delaney or Rebecca?
Michael, can you repeat the question?
Yeah. Hold on, though. It just kind of went away.
It's under answered, Michael.
Oh, thank you.
Sorry about that.
Thank you. No problem. Will recent events in Washington, D.C., as well as the murder of George Floyd, help teachers in addressing the warning signs leading up to the Holocaust?
I'm willing to tackle that.
Sure. Oh, Chris, yes, of course.
So this is always an ongoing question, as we know as educators. How do you make history relevant? And one of the things that we have been looking at is these enduring questions of history. I would invite you all to, again, go on Facebook Live, the USHMM's Facebook page. We had a program last week on why people join extremist movements. And it was led by a psychologist who is also a Holocaust survivor. That will help you quite a bit to get at the question that you asked. There is a lot of debate in the Holocaust world about how much we look at events, recent events in our country, starting with the murder of George Floyd, and what that means for addressing systemic racism and looking at the Holocaust. Some Holocaust organizations are very explicit about linking American racism in the United States with Nazi racist ideology. We just published last week, only 3 days ago, we just put out our new lesson plan in which we consulted with 3 professors of African-American history to get at the question of race, racism, the Holocaust, and draw some connections to today. So I would, I don't have access to the link right now, but I can send it to Michael and then he can send it to everybody. It's an enduring question and it's an ongoing thing. And it depends on the Holocaust organization and it depends on the mission. I can tell you that the Holocaust Memorial Resource and Education Center in Maitland, Florida has an exhibit right now, and you can see it online, that draws very explicit links from the Holocaust to the murder of George Floyd and racism today. As far as the events of what happened here at the Capitol on the 6th, I would encourage you to watch the Facebook Live program. We know that extremism in the Holocaust was a lot about glory. People wanted to gain glory. Extremism today is often driven by people feeling excluded, feeling like they need a place to belong. So watch the Facebook Live program. And I can say that it's really important to stay in touch with the Leo Baeck Institute, with the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum, and the work that all of the organizations are doing, because it's an evolving theme for us. We want to hold dear the history of the Holocaust, and make sure that people understand the context before they make those connections. Like, again, know the history first, because not everything is alike, as we know. There's a saying that history doesn't repeat, but it echoes. And so we want our audiences, we want teachers to before they make the connections, know the specifics of the history. To compare means to also contrast. How are things the same, but how are they different? I'll also send to Michael a list of warning signs. We have a book online called Fundamentals of Genocide and Mass Atrocity Prevention that lists the warning signs of genocide. And I would encourage you to use those in the classroom whenever you're studying genocide, mass atrocity, human rights violations, because those are good starting points. But again, know the similarities and know the differences, and help your students, because that's really important to historical thinking skills.
Thank you, Christina. That was a great, I mean, you answered that well, I thought. The next question is for Renata Evers. What is the most rewarding aspect of working with teachers? Did it change anything about how you think about or work with your collections?
Completely. It was an amazing experience and absolutely rewarding. It's always because, I mean, different worlds are coming together. I mean, I've worked for many decades in the library and archival world. So we are organizing material, make it available, make it accessible. But then there are different user groups. I mean, we have very different information seeking behavior and different ideas how they want to use it, and to match that. And that was absolutely informing how they looked for material, how they need it, what they want to get out of it. And then I've been trying to connect that how we organize material. And I realized, I mean, some of our ways are very good, are great, but some of the things don't match 100%. No? So, I mean, some of the things we can make it easier for them to find material so that they can use it for their students to tell a story. And I found it, the most interesting part is that it is crucial to identify significant documents. It is easier for students to learn from individual fates, individual stories, and connect it to individual documents or photos or pieces to get into the story, and then learn about the background. Because otherwise, it is way too overwhelming. It is a very different approach. And I appreciated how you went about finding your topics, the questions that you ask, and then try to connect it how libraries and archives are organizing material and make it available. So I'm still digesting this whole thing and try to find answers how we can make it easier for you to also use source material for students, which I think is, moment, I think I'm breaking up. No, because I think that is absolutely crucial in that time when so the survivor generation is slowly dying out. We know that, no? And we need to tell the story. We need to keep it alive. And how can we connect people who are So it's more than 80 years ago, how to connect them to the past. And I think that was so crucial to bring it alive. And that was the most rewarding aspect for me, to learn that and be part of this thinking process. And I thank you so much for that, and also to our two wonderful consultants, Rebecca and Natalie, to connect the dots. And I learned so much from all of you, and also now from your presentation. So that was just wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I think that's all we have time for now. And I know there are more questions, and I would encourage everyone to write to the Leo Baeck Institute. Some of you I've already written an email address to, but you can also send a general email to the Leo Baeck Institute, and I can send your questions to the appropriate people. I would be fine doing that. I wish we did have more time. It's an interesting discussion, and I hope people found it very helpful. I want to thank everyone for attending, and we will be in contact early next week with a follow-up email that will contain materials, links to everything that you saw today. We hope that you explore all the resources that we discussed at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, also the 1938 modules, lesson plans, basically ready for use. They can be found directly on our website. We'll send you a link to those lesson plans as well. So if you're an educator, we hope you find them helpful and use them.